Okay. And I will share my screen. Everyone see this? All right. All right, so first things first, I missed some of the discussion on Slack later in the day yesterday. So it looks like around 8 p.m. yesterday, the chain stalled. Maybe Jude, I think since you were doing most of the investigation, can you give a quick summary of what you discovered? And I think we still don't know the root cause.
Sure. So the networking pull thread simply ceased to run. Like normally what happens is the thread will continuously loop and it will send any network results like any transactions or blocks it receives onto the relayer thread for processing and appending to the chain state. That thread, for whatever reason, just stopped. It finished its execute. It finished running through one pass to the loop, and then the logs indicate that it never happened again. The thread is still alive though, and the sockets were still being held. It just wasn't making any progress. And we know that this is the case because the P2P thread has a channel open to the relayer thread that, if we're broken, would cause the relayer thread to also exit, which in turn would cause mining to stop working. But we know from the logs that it kept mining successfully as if nothing was wrong. We don't know why this happened. I posted a GDB stack trace, and I'm not sure why this is the case, but it didn't indicate anything beyond what syscall each of the threads was blocked on, besides the one thread that's responsible for talking to Prometheus. I sent a PR last night that adds a few extra debug statements, because Lord knows we don't have enough of those. That will, if this happens again, will at least help us shed light on some more potential root causes, but we don't know yet why the thread just decided to stop running.
So it was still polling the sockets though?
No, it wasn't pulling the socket at all. The thread simply ceased to execute. It's almost like it blocked on something and deadlocked internally or something like that.
Interesting. Okay, all right. And this is the first time we're seeing something like this, right? Like, do we have any other kind of observed events of like a thread deadlocking?
We've seen a thread spinning, but that was diagnosed by simply observing that there was near 100% CPU use, and the debug stack trace from GDB showed it was stuck inside of a loop.
Mm-hmm.
But no such evidence this time around.
All right. Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled if this happens again. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this before we move on to the next update? All right, next I just wanted to do a quick check-in with the refactoring work. I know Ludo and Aaron synced on Thursday. So maybe the two of you can provide an update. I don't know, Jude, if you have anything to share on the refactoring task that you were on your plate.
No, I was rewriting all the code that I lost last week, so I don't have anything to share on that.
All right, Aaron, Ludo?
Sure. So last week I was working on the refactor of the BurnDB into a database where each snapshot is, instead of being identified by just the burn block hash, they're identified by like a sortition identifier, which is going to be like a combination of the burn header hash and the proof of transfer fork identifier. I am most of the way through the refactor. Like all of the code changes are done and it builds and the tests build, but majority of the tests fail. And so I'm currently working through getting the tests to pass. And simply because like this PR or these changes, while being very large in sort of this, just the raw number of lines of code, while that's true, there is like basically no like algorithmic or otherwise changes. So like getting these tests to work should be pretty quick, just because like it's probably a handful of lines of code that are probably causing all the tests to fail. So should have something hopefully soon.
Cool. Ludo, anything to add from your end?
On my end, I still have to stub a few things. So yeah, I should be done by the end of the day. And then yeah, I can move on to something else.
Okay. All right, moving to the board. So I moved over all of the issues that were in progress last week and hadn't been closed off. And then we have a bunch of new issues to review as well. So let's just quickly go through stuff in review here. We blocked on feedback for all these PRs.
I think I need to review that still.
Okay.
I should be able to do that by today.
All right. And Ludo, you reviewed these PRs already?
I think I did review the 2 first PR, but not the last one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The last one, maybe I should just close because like it will be like more or less entirely superseded by integer subtyping, which I don't know. I might try and implement rapidly, like this weekend or something. And so,
yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Let's close that PR in that case and make a note. Just add a comment that we were planning to implement integer subtyping.
Yeah.
That way everyone knows. Okay. And
yeah,
let's try to
and,
review.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's fine.
Yeah. And let's try to review the PR around nonces and get it merged.
Quick question on the integer subtyping, Aaron. Do you think that the way, so are you going to, so at some point we want to implement the string subtype. Are you going to design this feature so that we can like maybe reuse the subtyping mechanism for string subtype?
Yeah, that's my hope.
Cool, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to close this PR. We're going to try to get this PR merged. Let's go through stuff that's in progress. And this is a new issue that you filed and you posted an update on, I think it was in GitHub. You want to just quickly catch everyone up?
This is a subtle bug in the MARF in the way in which it processes, in the way in which it walks through a particular node path. The way it manifests, I think I talked about this last week, but the way it manifests is if you happen to have hit a leaf node that is also at the end of the path, so it has no path segment of its own, it can cause a memory leak. It can cause the code path to append a new leaf to be executed as opposed to overwrite the existing leaf, even if the path is already represented. This didn't get noticed for a long time because it doesn't affect correctness, but it does, however, make it noticeably difficult to load a try back into RAM from a on-disk representation, which we now have to do as part of the unconfirmed state PR. This is fixed in I pushed the branch, but I haven't opened the PR yet of my work on the unconfirmed state, but this is fixed in that branch.
Okay. And have you been able to reconstruct all of your lost work?
For the most part, I'm doing the updates to the RPC interface today and should have the PR open by the end of the day.
Okay. I guess we talked about this. So Ludo, you have a clear next step. So you're planning to update your PR, or you're planning to, you and Aaron are sort of merging the PRs out of band and then we'll send a single unified PR?
No, I think I'm going to send my PR. We're going to merge it, but it's not going to affect like the behavior of the current node. Like it's not plugged.
Okay.
And then we will, do the plugging in another pass.
Yeah. So in my PR, what I'll do is I'll unstub the stub functions in Ludo's PR, And then after the next refactor PR, the stacks block one, once that one unstubs, then we can switch the main loop to being Ludo's main loop.
Okay. All right, and then this is the same unconfirmed state PR, Jude?
Yes.
All right. Let's see, I did not, so Matt hasn't responded here, but I checked in the DevX meeting, and I think the conclusion was that this is not really a blocker for them right now. So I would say we should focus our attention towards getting working directory, working on the testnet, and maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to the mocknet later. So.
Yeah, and also, so I think that last week you asked if we wanted to have this ability to recover for like Argonne or like the other testnets. And I think that as long as the database schemas are not fixed, then we probably want to avoid doing that, because otherwise we will have to be able to handle migrations from one schema to another.
Yeah.
Which might be painful. So maybe we should wait as long as possible to.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna move this out of the milestone here. Okay, we talked about this already. All right, some of the stuff that was in the backlog, I'm guessing starting here and out, Jude, you haven't had a chance to come back to these just yet, right?
No, but I hope to start 1677 this week.
Okay, I'll leave this in the backlog for now.
Yeah.
What about 1561, Aaron?
I haven't taken a look at this. I think this we more or less are going to block on the POX implementation.
Then let me just move it to a future milestone. I don't think it will get it done in this milestone, right?
Yeah.
All right. This not update. All right. Is this already part of the PR that you're working on, Jude?
Oh, that's another fun little bug I discovered this weekend while working on the PR. If it's the case that you use a chain state instance to mine a block, specifically mine a microblock, the act of producing that microblock and then subsequently rolling back the transaction that the block level transaction that represents the new state that that block contains. This in turn, the act of rolling back will cause the inner marf of the inner marfed KV of the Clarity instance to cease. It will cause all the get methods of that marf to fail. And the reason this is the case is because the marf's internal storage, its tri-file storage pointer, points to the block that was just rolled back by the act of mining the next batch of transactions. The fix is pretty straightforward. It just on rollback, and this is also done in my branch, on rollback, we just call the storages, the tri-file storages open block on the Sentinel block hash, which should always succeed. And that causes all the get methods to keep working. Because the reason that the get methods were failing wasn't because the key value pairs weren't there. It was because the act of trying to restore the storage pointer back to the original block would fail because that block no longer exists.
Yeah.
Makes sense to everyone? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna move this to in progress. there was I think a bunch of just PRs from Pascal over the weekend, mostly documentation updates, and this minor code fix here. Looks like Judy already looked at it. Looks good to you.
Yeah, the fix is straightforward, but we can't deploy it right away because it is consensus breaking.
Yeah, so the next testnet restart.
Yep.
All right.
Should we just create a tag for like next restart
agree.
or something?
Yeah, we should do that. In particular, we want to schedule the application of this PR with the deployment with the restart of the testnet.
All right. Same thing here. Has anyone looked at this one?
I have not, but I will take a look today.
All right. Okay, so this is Pascal pinged me on Discord separately, and we talked briefly about this when I spoke to him. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. But he was running into a lot of these bad nonce messages. It doesn't seem to impact functionality, but it's very noisy and impedes debugging. So he put together a sort of minimal repro, if you will. And I'm wondering, Aaron, if you can try this with your nonce fixes PR, see if that helps, or if there's at least figure out if there's anything else that we need to look into here, or if this is just expected behavior. And he has some notes on how much extraneous processing nodes have to do for transactions that are in the mempool and rejected due to nonce issues.
Yeah, so this is definitely expected behavior with the way that our mempool works. Like we keep transactions around in the mempool for a fairly long time, and then use the nonce to control whether or not a transaction gets remined.
Let me ask him to just try this out with your PR.
I would say it almost certainly is going to continue happening in my PR. Like, my PR doesn't really change that behavior too much.
So is this something that we want to address, or there isn't like a real problem per se here?
Hard to say. I think that there is not a real problem here today, but it may be the case that the way that our mempool works is not sustainable going forward. Like,
okay. All right, I'm going to just assign it to you, Aaron, for now. If you can just review Pascal's comments, especially this section right here, and then just respond with some clear action item, whether we acknowledge that there is an issue, but we can't prioritize right now, or that we'll come back to it at some future point. It's not really a big problem per se.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right. I think a few issues that Jude filed. You want to talk through these, Jude?
Sure. We don't implement any handling for the Poison microblock transaction right now, but we will soon need to. This is more of a comment on how to handle a particular corner case of the Poison microblock transaction. Namely, if a miner produces a forked microblock stream, so it forks at sequence number n, for example, but n is less than the max by a wide margin, then the two forks can be somewhat long. Like there can be multiple valid Poison microblock transactions that could be mined for that stream. This comment is just on how do you pick, how do you, first of all, stop multiple people from trying to invalidate the same stream and thus get the 5% commission reward for doing so, as well as at what point do we consider the chosen stream at what point do we consider a stream that has been built upon sufficiently confirmed that even if we discovered the second fork later, it would be irrelevant? The answer is pretty straightforward. We just make it so that if there's multiple poison microblock transactions mined for the same stream, you pick the one that has the lowest sequence number. The slashing of the bad miner as well as the commission fee don't take effect until the maturity window anyway, which is 100 blocks after the fact. And if no poison microblock transaction is mined within that maturity window, or if there is a hidden fork that comes to light after the fact, then a poison microblock transaction that is mined over 100 blocks later, which is the maturity window, would simply be ignored. Like the microblock stream in that case would be sufficiently confirmed that the presence of a fork wouldn't, or is unlikely to cause a network split.
So when do you think we'll actually be discussing sort of the implementation of this? I mean, it doesn't seem like this is something we need to tackle in this sprint, right?
We, as soon as we start doing microblocks as a major thing in our network, which we don't really do right now. I think we do one microblock and one anchored block per per epoch. But once we start doing multiple microblocks per epoch, we'll need to start thinking about this.
All right, I'm gonna move it to a future milestone for now.
Sure.
We can revisit.
I would actually, I don't know, Aaron, I know has said multiple times that we should be testing our microblock systems as early as possible. I agree, because there's ways this can go south pretty easily. So maybe we should start focusing on this no later than one sprint from now, or do it concurrent with POX.
All right, how about this one?
This is a related issue. If it's the case that, so if it is, I don't believe this is enforced right now, but if it is the case that there are two microblock stream forks, and even if there is no poison microblock transaction mined yet, the act of building off of building off of a fork of the microblock stream when multiple forks exist shouldn't be allowed. Because otherwise you could see a scenario where you have multiple anchored blocks that descend from a fork, different forks of the same microblock stream. I don't yet know what the best way to deal with this is yet. It could be a relaying policy, or it could be something that ChainState itself just rejects or retroactively rejects.
Maybe we should just do, I mean, it seems like there are a bunch of issues around microblock handling, and we're talking about how and when to start more proactively testing and exercising. Maybe we should have like a dedicated discussion around microblocks and when and how to introduce them into the testnet, that we can bundle all of these issues under. That makes sense.
We have a blockchain architecture meeting this week, right?
Yeah, I think so.
We should talk about that then.
Okay, you want to add that to the agenda?
Sure.
Yeah, there is one this week. Okay. For now, I'm going to clear this milestone. Okay. So Matt filed this one. He's not on the call, but we can discuss it with the DevX team tomorrow, unless someone already has context on this. Let's see.
Oh, yeah, I think we talked about this in the DevX meeting
last week. Yeah, I remember now.
Yeah.
This seems like, I mean, if it's just including one more information in the mempool transaction, that seems like a fairly small change, right?
Yeah.
So we should just do it.
Yeah.
All right, who wants to take it on? Udo? All right. Okay, let's quickly do this one first. I added a note here, but I think there was some discussion in a previous issue that maybe we can link in here, but I couldn't find it back then. But basically, Pascal's pointing out if the event dispatcher is blocked for whatever reason, it'll stall the node. And I remember we talked about this, and this is intended behavior. So I just want to give him some additional pointers for discussion that we have had in the past or other issues where we've talked about this. Does anyone remember or can look up? Otherwise, maybe Jude or Ludo can just add a comment.
Sure, I can add a comment.
Right.
The rationale was that we don't want, if you have a sidecar at all, we want the sidecar to be able to keep pace with the node. And so we make them process in lockstep. And if that's a problem for him, then he needs to modify the sidecar so that it can buffer up any transaction receipts and then process the receipts later.
Yeah. All right, so after you add a comment, feel free to close this issue.
Okay.
I think there was some discussion on Slack about this one. You remember this, Aaron? Or maybe we talked about it in the DevX meeting last week. But basically, this was an instance where the Stacks node was not returning like a richer sort of error message saying what happened when the contract name is too small. It's just like a blanket HTTP 400.
Yeah. I think that is, yeah, I think that we need more information for this issue. I can reply and ask for just like more detail.
Okay.
Because I think it's the case that if you try to deploy a contract, like you'll get a mempool rejection error, which has a lot of data. But if you're trying to do something like call a read-only function or something with a contract name that's too short, then you just get a blanket 404.
A 404 or a 400?
I think it's a 404 because the URL parser will fail. Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, I'm looking through the notes. We did talk about this in the DevX sync last week. And I think the conclusion of the discussion was that, I mean, this seems like a fairly quick thing to put together in a unit test to just verify whether, you know, the mempool rejection actually does what we expect it to do.
We have a bunch of unit tests that do that. So this is definitely already covered, I think.
For this specific case, like where...
yeah, this handling is deliberate. Like you asked for a path that does not exist.
Well, we don't, so the problem is that like this description, it describes two different things where we have two different unit tests actually that test the behavior. So yeah, in order to get like a unit test that specifically covers this, I think we would need like a lot more detail from the report.
All right. So maybe... And maybe we can also link in the existing unit tests that cover like the things that, or we already have coverage for. That way, the poster can sort of eliminate those things and focus on new information. Okay. I think that covers everything. I did before the meeting. I already went through sort of all new issues and picked out the ones. I think there were a handful of typos and other PRs from Pascal that have already been merged or in the process of being merged. So I cherry picked a few that I wanted to discuss. Is there anything here that jumps out? I think we've discussed most of these in the past already.
There's like a couple open PRs that we might be able to just like figure out really quickly what we want to do with.
Sure.
So like 1701.
1701.
The byte order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, go back. Can you go back to that? What file is that?
It's
It's
the main cargo.
Why are we using byte order as a dependency?
Right. So, so maybe we should, look into this.
Yeah, that's weird. I know it's like a dependency of a dependency, but I don't know why we have it as a main dependency.
So you're saying that we might be able to just get rid of this dependency altogether?
Yep.
Okay.
It looks like Bitcoin uses it. Yeah.
I wish I knew why it was failing. Can we ask the guy for more information?
Yeah.
Like I'm very suspicious of unlocked packages because they make excellent backdoor vectors, especially for like small things like byte order.
Well, it's not. This wouldn't unlock it, right? It's just a version bump.
Nevertheless, though, like I'd like to see the specific build error this guy had.
Yeah.
So I added a comment to ask him for that, but outside of that, like, is there, assuming that this version bump is safe, like, is there any other objection?
Assuming
you already
it's
have the
safe,
dependency.
like I'll take a look at it really quick, like just the source code.
Okay. All right. Any other PRs here that we want to talk through? I think we discussed most of them.
For this docs markdown files PR, like I get the sense that like Alex really probably shouldn't be owning this PR at this point.
Yeah.
Like if we want to delete the docs, which
Yeah.
I think we should delete some of these docs, like we shouldn't have tutorials in this repo.
Yeah.
Then like we should just do it. And I don't think that we should be like putting this on Alex's plate. So maybe I should just take this PR over.
Okay. Go for it. Is there a way to like in other systems that I've used, like there was an actual operation that allowed you to like transfer the PR? It was called commandeer.
Oh yeah, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's an equivalent.
Yeah, I think it's probably a two-step process. Like we would have to switch the, we would have to clone his branch into our repo and then change the base branch.
Yeah, or you could just download this PR and submit as a new PR after
Yes.
whatever
Yeah,
changes.
yeah.
That's probably simpler.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll probably just do that.
All right. I'm gonna just assign it to you. All right. Anything else in here?
That's probably, I think that's it.
Okay. So the last thing I wanted to do, unless there are other items that folks want to add, please do so. The last thing I wanted to do was just come back to our discussion around planning and estimation for proof of transfer. So I took this table and moved it to this doc just to keep things, not to like pollute this doc even further. And basically what I tried to do was just go through each row in here and just put them, allocate them against specific individuals and try to, use some very hand-wavy time estimates based on the t-shirt sizing. And what I'm trying to do is come up with a target date by which we can track, or we think that we'll be done with the proof of transfer implementation. And that has implications on the future testnet phases as well. And as we approach mainnet, like there are a whole bunch of things that are sort of getting dependent on different either testnet phases or the mainnet launch itself. And so I think it is important to start firming up some time estimate while we still approach, we have the same kind of mindset that if issues come up, we'll address them, and we obviously don't want to cut corners anywhere. But I think working towards an estimate is useful. So to that end, what I wanted to do here was, first have each of you kind of just maybe spend a minute or two looking through this. And what I want to uncover is a handful of things. One, if there's like obvious dependencies that are not captured here, and the sequence in which we might be able to do operations, sort of timelines that seem like way off. Like right now I have like determined recipient set as 2 days, might be very aggressive or too conservative in some cases. So kind of flag those. We don't necessarily have to do that synchronously right now, but I would like each of you to just carve out some time and review this. And feel free to make any adjustments directly to this, move the blocks around or resize them for timing. And I want to see kind of where we land up, or if there are other issues that are not captured here. I think there are a few in these tables that we haven't created issues for, or like not issues in GitHub, but I just bundled up, all of the networking changes, because I think last time Jude had mentioned that they'll likely be a single PR. So yeah, that's what I'm looking to get out of this exercise. Would it be useful to do this synchronously? Do people want to just take time to review this asynchronously and make changes or leave comments? What would be most useful? Or people don't care, and it's okay. Like I can move things around. Yeah, I understand. Like it might feel kind of like a not very useful thing to do, or maybe not a good use of your time. So I appreciate that sentiment, but it will certainly help me and others to start firming up the timelines. So
Does the stacking wire format stuff have to be done by DevX?
Sorry?
It's not that I don't know. I feel like this is longer than it needs to be, the stacking wire format. And I think the reason why it's longer than it needs to be is because it's requiring back and forth.
I mean, that's 3 days.
I mean, you could decide the ordering in less than 1 day, probably, like the field ordering. Yeah. Never mind. Like it's not important. Like you can deal with it when we come to it.
I mean, if you can get it done in 1 day versus 3 days, great. Like I take more buffer than less. But let me just make a note here. So I guess like the real thing you're expressing is that you don't think that there might be need for a lot of consultation. We can sort of come up with a format and just share it, and let people react to it afterwards.
Yeah, I think that I think this is the case for 2 reasons. First of all, the limiting factors in the design space for the wire formats are what Bitcoin lets us write to the chain more than anything else. And second of all, the second limiting factor is the design of POX itself. Like the needs of POX directly control what goes into the stacking wire format. As long as there is a well-defined format, I don't see why DevX or UserX would have any problem adding the relevant library support to like the Blockstack.js library or the other tooling.
Sure. Okay, so maybe we can just walk through this together and just get reactions on other things, just like we did. So we're already in this week. Let's go through the items in here. Like any reactions, comments, like do we think that we'll be able to get all of this done this week, tentatively? I see people are already making changes, which is good. Why don't we take maybe 2 minutes, review this asynchronously, and then we'll talk through it together. Sounds good?
Yeah.
All right.
In this timeline here, I noticed that there doesn't seem to be any items pertaining to dealing with anchor blocks going missing or other sorts of pathological cases that can arise even just by accident.
Yeah, I think that that's part of going live with any of this is just going to require test cases. Like, I would say that the goal in all of these implementations is to arrive at something that handles anchor blocks appearing and disappearing. And so it's just like a question of making sure that we get the tests in place for that.
Yeah, so there's this one row here at the bottom, and the way at least I remember the discussion was that this is sort of a testing task, as Aaron is saying, and so we can create another item for it. But the way I was looking at it is, we're focusing on the implementing the pieces, and like in an ideal world, if the implementation is correct, then all of the tests will just reveal that things are working fine.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that I don't think any of these blocks covers that implementation work of adding the corner case handling in the first place. Unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I think that that's what the work of the chain view, so the top level chain view handles that case.
But this isn't up here in this diagram though.
I think it's chain view stubs.
Stubs?
Yeah. That's not a particularly descriptive name, but it's the chain. It's like the stacks chain view object, which I think Ludo is calling the stacks chain controller.
The chains coordinator.
Chains coordinator, yeah. And so the chains coordinator handles basically creating new fork identifiers and then passing that to the sortition DB, which uses the fork identifier to identify like which snapshot fork it should be building off of.
Okay. That includes the reprocessing loop as well then, right?
Yeah, so the reprocessing loop is in the coordinator.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, just on that note, happy to change the name again. It's just like I had an issue with the view naming because this object is mutating the state. And but I don't have any strong feeling.
Naming remains one of the hardest problems in computer science.
Yeah. Coordinator sounds great to me.
Yeah.
Like it's perfectly descriptive. So.
All right, so let's just quickly go through week by week. So this week we're in right now. This looks reasonable to everyone, or like matches our current view of reality.
So we're going to be working through the next few weeks of weekends as well.
Oh, that's not at least what I'm implying for the rows. Like where possible, like I didn't actually span them over the weekend, and where they have been spanned, the implication is not that I'm expecting people to work over the weekends. It's just to, yeah. So no, that's not the assumption.
It's just you and Aaron. Not me.
Yeah, so I mean, like if you want to take this one and split it into two to exclude the weekend, that's totally fine. It's just,
Right.
it was mostly just convenience.
Yeah, I'm just asking for clarification. Like one way to interpret this graph is just like number of engineering days required as opposed to like the actual scheduled days we'll be working on things. Just wanted to make sure that we're all aware of that.
Yeah, so again, from my side, like I'm not expecting anyone to, work nights and weekends. What I do want to do is actually go through the exercise of thinking through how much work we have in front of us, how much bandwidth we have across, people on the team, and then start to come up with some estimates, and we can, buffer in time for QA and testing, other sort of unforeseen things. All of those are fine, but I just want to work towards an estimate with whatever assumptions we bake into there.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the way that I'm reading this graph is basically just like a start date and an end date, and I'm not conveying necessarily any information in the fill.
Yes.
Right.
But that's why I'm confused because
Yeah.
you're looking at your timeline, Aaron. That basically means you have 1 day off between now and the end of July, and that is the 18th. If you're saying it takes, 7 days to work on track POX anchor blocks, then this really needs to be broken up by weekends. So that way our finalization of the end date is realistic.
Right. So, yeah. So when I look at the track POX anchor blocks, like I think that it is reasonable that I would have this done at the end of the day next Wednesday. Like I think that would be like a reasonable target.
Okay.
The thing that I think remains kind of an unknown is that ultimately there's going to be a lot of integration work included in all of these issues.
Yes.
Like all of these issues are going to have a lot of integration work with each other, and then integration work with the Stacks blockchain. And there's going to be some unknown unknowns that could create additional work there. And so when I say that, like, when I look at this like July 27 date, I would say like I feel like kind of reasonably confident that actually like a lot of this work, or even most if not all of this work, could be done by then. But there might be some like just new things that we aren't necessarily aware of. So I'd say
we can put in, an additional like week or 10 days, however long we think we need, as sort of, either integration issues or unforeseen issues, and we can, revise this every week just to kind of see how we're tracking. But at least it gives us, even like this is a useful thing to kind of have to anchor around. Also, right now there's a bunch of duplication in here, information duplication, in the sense that I'm using the colors, and we have rows that are all conveying the same information, which is who's working on what. So if there is ways in which we can use the colors or the rows for other things, that's fine by me as well, to the extent that it's useful for people. I was mostly just trying to see who's working on what, and how are we sequencing things, just to get to a timeline.
I am somewhat pessimistic on integration work, as you can see in the graph now.
Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of like, we're going to get the integration to work, then we're going to start the node up, then the node's going to crash for mysterious and inexplicable reasons, and then we're going to have to get the DevOps team involved, and then, yeah.
I mean, I think like my hope is that we could almost split that work in half, where before we do any anchor block, actual anchor block detection, we do an integration step, so that like we have our main loop running, but with no anchor blocks being chosen, so that it's always on like the burn everything fork.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that way, like we'll be able to test like maybe the most sensitive code changes, because like all of the consensus changes that are going to be tracking like sortition IDs, fork IDs, all of that kind of stuff, we should be able to do like maybe a round of testing with that first. So that would be like next week. Like we should be able to start integrating that stuff as soon as like, I think the use index block hash item.
Yeah, as soon as that clears.
Yeah.
One thing that really helped me a lot during the later days of Neon was having a separate set of VMs just for running like an off-network Neon network. Because then I could do things like build the thing in place, I could make live changes to the system, and I could just iterate really quickly on problems that only seem to manifest in runtime. Maybe we should all just go ahead and grab some VMs when the time comes and just have our own private little test nets for figuring this sort of thing out. Like a lot of the networking patches that went through were built with the intelligence gathered that way.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, that's reasonable. So should we just put in a block for the integration work that you were saying, Aaron, that we could do potentially next week?
Yeah, so like maybe we throw a block in. Yeah, so I guess in this Dropbox chart, we don't have the ability to like do like a blocker across all three.
No. So we can duplicate pretty easily.
New item.
All right, we're coming up on time here. So if you have any other sort of comments or things come up, please do add them to this talk. Otherwise, we'll just keep revisiting it every week and try to keep it as accurate as possible. And again, I'm not planning to share this publicly. It's mostly for our team, but at the same time, this is on a public recording anyway, so it's useful to be just transparent in thinking about timelines. Anything else in terms of the agenda? No? Alrighty, well, happy Monday, everyone. And we'll do, as we had discussed before, we'll try to do sort of a virtual stand-up or check-in every other day. And I did follow up on Discord, so all of the things that we discussed are possible. So if everyone already is on Discord, we can actually make that change pretty much immediately, where we can have a channel that's writable by, core stack developers, or however we want to frame it, and readable by everyone.
Sounds good.
My only question is, are we going to discuss infrastructure in that channel?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, go ahead.